Thank you so much, Dee. Yes, so earlier this week, MPs in Ottawa held their first ever session online. And today, Toronto City Council is going to give that one a shot for the first time, holding today's meeting online, virtually, in the face of this COVID crisis to get to some very pressing business to be taken care of. As he does each week, Mayor John Tory joins us live via Skype to talk about all of that and more. Good morning to you, Mayor.
Good morning, Mel.
Okay, so the council meeting, which there's going to be a lot of eyes on it, and hopefully a lot of people using that mute button properly, because we saw what happened at the federal level. What is the #1 priority for this meeting today?
Well, I guess the #1 priority in terms of new business, as it were, is the approval of this modular housing thing, which I think is very exciting for Toronto. It's like a Lego set. It's been used in Vancouver to provide housing almost immediately. People could be living in it by September, and it will be manufactured over the summer. But I think in terms of the general purpose of the meeting, it's really to have some accountability. I've had this extraordinary emergency power for about a month now, and the law requires that we have a meeting to review that and how it was exercised and to continue with it and to continue with the bylaw that deals with how people conduct themselves in public parks in terms of physical spacing. So it really is about that accountability, having the council brought up to date on what has happened, hearing their comments and questions about all of that. I think that's a fundamentally important thing at a time when we are facing as a city an emergency and when there have been extraordinary declarations of emergency made by me as the mayor under the law.
Indeed, you've still been keeping in contact with various councillors, so it's not like that communication has been cut off. But when it comes to this state of emergency, again, I ask you every single time for a timeline. I know you can't provide me a specific date, but do you see any sort of end in sight, at least when it comes to some services?
Well, I think, first of all, the state of emergency will be prolonged for as long as the council permits it to, because I've decided rather than declaring it myself, I would put it in front of the council. And I think they will recognize the need for continued flexibility and ability to move quickly on the part of the city government. With respect to sort of the so-called light at the end of the tunnel, I can only say to you that I think the numbers are improving. If you separate out long-term care, where we've had a particularly acute problem in a provincially regulated sector, and the rest of the community transmission, there is still transmission of this virus taking place in the community. So it means we have to carry on with our physical separation, physical distancing efforts. But I think there's enough progress that we can see that it's time for us to do, as we are doing, to do the plans, make the plans necessary to reopen. We're working very hard at that with the province, with a view to, as soon as possible, getting life back to normal, normal in quotation marks, because I think normal is going to be different than it was before.
Very different. We are looking at the calendar. It is April 30th. That means tomorrow, May 1st, a lot of people looking ahead to how am I going to make ends meet when it comes to rent. What has the city done lately?
Well, the city has no jurisdiction to deal with, with people and their rent issues. The landlord and tenant issues are the exclusive domain of the province under our constitution. And so what we've done is we've certainly made arrangements to be accommodating to our own tenants, because we have some 100,000 tenants in Toronto community housing. But beyond that, what I've done is I've been an advocate. I commend the province for the fact they banned evictions, but I think there's more that might be done. And I certainly think there is no excuse whatsoever, zero. And I'm a free enterpriser. I understand landlords have their obligations to meet as well, but there is no excuse whatsoever for landlords, any of them, big or small, not being able to reach some reasonable accommodation, say, for example, to take the May rent if people are having trouble paying it because they've lost their job, and spread that out over the rest of the lease so that people don't have to make that May payment. And I'm hopeful that, of course, if they don't have to make the May payment, by the time we get to June, we'll be much closer to the day when people are back at work, or maybe some of them will, in fact, be back at work. We'll have to see. But I just think there's no reason why pragmatism, frankly, I mean, these are the customers of the landlords. And generally, you try and treat your customers well, including when they're having trouble. And I think they can do that without hurting themselves, the landlords, and I trust many of them are doing it. But I don't have any power to do anything as mayor, or the city council doesn't, beyond that, vis-a-vis the relationship between landlords and tenants and who pays rent and who doesn't.
While we're talking about housing, an initiative by the city to get those encampments, get those who have been living in those encampments. We know that the shelter system has a number of issues when it comes to the spread of COVID-19 and getting them into temporary housing. How long can this temporary housing last? What is the plan?
Well, the temporary housing have made available by a company called the Times Group, and I thank them for their civic-mindedness, is going to be available to us for quite a few months. And the bottom line is it allows us to get people. We have 125 units in the Midtown, and it allows us to get people out of the encampments, and we will then take those encampments down, out of those encampments and into housing, where they will be supported. But the encampments have huge public safety issues with them in terms of propane tanks and fire safety and those kinds of things. And now, increasingly, huge public health problems with physical distancing, among other things, where the virus could spread in those kinds of encampments. So people will be offered that housing. Some have moved into it already or are about to momentarily. And when they have moved out of those encampment settings, those encampments will be taken down.
I want to get to Jesse Ketchum childcare because a lot of people have questions. Of course, this is one of 7 locations for essential workers' children. I know the deep clean is happening and the investigation is ongoing as to what went wrong, how this could have spread, because I know there were some stringent practices put into place, or at least there should have been. Do you have the latest when it comes to an update on maybe how this was spread or moving forward, how this could potentially reopen and what might change when it does reopen?
Well, we're looking right now, and the purpose of the investigation being done by public health and others is to determine how this happened. But, you have to remember at the same time, there have been outbreaks in Sick Children's Hospital where they have the most stringent policies ever. You've seen it in Toronto Public Health's own office, where they had a number of staff people, unfortunately, came down with this. So this is a virus we still don't know as much about as we might compared to some other medical conditions. And so what we're doing is taking a look at what were incredibly stringent conditions, as you said, on those child care centers, as you would expect. And trying to make them even more stringent, whatever we can do. And that investigation is ongoing, and it will produce perhaps some recommendations. And I can assure you, in the interest of those children, who are the children of our essential service workers, we will implement those recommendations immediately, whatever they may be.
And Mayor, when we talk about these essential workers, do you have a breakdown of who they are? Are they healthcare workers? Are they transit workers? Or is it a mix of all of them?
It's a mix of all of them. And in fact, as you may have seen, the province expanded the definition of essential service workers and thus made other children of other workers eligible for this child care yesterday. So it now includes people like grocery store workers, certain kinds of truck drivers and so on, because these are people who've had to stay on the job no matter what. And oftentimes their child care arrangements, often provided by us or by other private operators, are closed by government order. So that's why we moved uniquely as a city in North America. I think we were the first city, maybe one of the only ones, that has a network of emergency child care like this 24/7 for people who have to go to work, but who by a government order from another government have lost their own child care. And so we stepped in to provide for those people to make sure they could continue to come and do their hard work for us.
Yeah, and very quickly, I think we have just a little bit of time. I want to ask you how it's going when it comes to the curb being closed off on a number of hotspots across the city. I know our Roger Peterson's very invested in this one, and he has a lot of questions when it comes to what's being done to ensure that physical distancing on a number of sidewalks and hotspots across the city. How is it going so far, and have more spots been identified?
It's going fine, and the public have helped us. The very first suggestions came in, and the first 2 that came in and that are at the top of the list were from an appearance I made right here on BT. One of them being the Loblaw store, I remember, at Carlton and Church, and another one out on Gerrard Street in Little India there. And so that came from BT viewers, and we would tell people we want them to tell us about other hotspots through 311. But it's going fine, and I think it is a common sense solution as opposed to what has been pushed at the city all the way through this, which is just randomly closing down all kinds of streets. And we're not doing that. We are, in fact, closing streets down in a common sense fashion, closing lanes down and making for sidewalk accommodation where the congestion actually requires it. And I think that's the sensible thing to do for now, with no ruling out of things that might happen in the future as part of the reopening of the city.
And that beeping was actually my reminder to pay for my parking. So we'll leave it there.
No, to get rid of me. Come on, you don't have to be polite to me. It's time to give Tory the hook.
Mayor Tory, always appreciate your time. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mel.